I got to tell you something. If yesterday was any indication, this college football season is going to make 2007 look perfectly normal by comparison. And that was a season which featured Kansas and Hawaii both playing in BCS bowl games. So I'm going to start with Oklahoma blowing a 35-14 lead to Kansas State, losing to K-State for the second year in a row. This on the heels of Kansas State losing to a depleted Arkansas State team in their last game. Arkansas State is maybe the third or fourth best team in the Sun Belt Conference. Kansas State came in missing 5 guys in their secondary, and Oklahoma could not take advantage. What did I learn from this game? Lincoln Riley might be the most overrated coach in college football. And I'm going to tell you why. Because he's an offensive genius, sure, and a quarterback guru, sure. But as smart as he is offensively, he's just as dumb defensively. I mean, again, Oklahoma's defense getting exposed for the frauds that they are. Does Oklahoma even practice defense? It sure didn't look like they practiced tackling yesterday. Hell, I'm not even sure the defense ever stepped off the bus. At least they never came out of the locker room at halftime, because the tackling was pathetic. I was almost convinced for a second there that it was just people dressing up as a defense in the second half, because it was just monumentally horrible and just an utter collapse by the defense in the second half. But I'm not going to let the offense off the hook. Spencer Rattler threw 3 interceptions. Let's maybe tone down the Rattler for Heisman talk, all right? I don't think it's happening. If you think he looked like a Heisman quarterback yesterday, well, I don't know what to tell you, other than it's a good thing you're not a Heisman voter. Oklahoma's playoff chances. Please, playoff committee, for the love of everything we enjoy about college football, scrap Oklahoma off your radar. For the love of, please, if UCF or Cincinnati goes undefeated, they should be in the playoff over Oklahoma. And at this point, I think it's a disgrace that Oklahoma should even get any benefit of the doubt. UCF and Cincinnati would both destroy Kansas State. So would half the teams in the American Athletic Conference. Memphis, who's in the American, beat the Arkansas State team that beat Kansas State. I don't want to hear it about Oklahoma deserving to be in the playoff. What? So they can give up 70 points this time? Maybe 80 points even? I mean, last year's debacle against LSU was horrible. This year would be even worse if they're allowed in. And I don't think Texas should be let off the hook either, just because they got a lucky once-in-a-30-years type comeback because Texas Tech took hands team lessons from the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, Texas, to their credit, they play fairly well in the big games. They won a bowl game against Utah last year. They won the Sugar Bowl against Georgia the year before that. They beat Oklahoma a couple years ago. They play Oklahoma fairly well. But they also struggled to beat or lose outright to inferior competition that they should blow out. Remember the Kansas game last year where they needed a field goal at the end just to win. They really should have lost to Texas Tech this year. They got lucky to beat Texas Tech in Lubbock 2 years ago. They lost to TCU last year, who went 5-7. They lost to Iowa State last year, who was not great. This is why I say that Texas under Tom Herman reminds me a lot of what Clemson football was under Tommy Bowden. They were the exact same way. They would beat Miami on the road one week, lose to Duke the next, get blown out by Wake Forest one week, beat Florida State the next. And Florida State's another whole issue that I'll get into later, by the way. And Tom Herman doesn't have a Hall of Fame dad Hall of Fame coach for a dad that's going to protect him either. So I do think he has to do something. He's on the hot seat, I think. I mean, I know this year's going to be weird. Coaches probably won't get fired, yada, yada, yada. But they brought Tom Herman into Texas to compete for national championships. And from what I saw against Texas Tech, they're still a long ways away from even being a playoff contender. They might, I'll give them this, they might win the Big 12 this year by default. Although they do have to play Oklahoma State on the road, but Oklahoma State might also win the Big 12 by default, but they haven't looked very good either. They looked really bad against Tulsa. The Big 12 winner might be ranked 20th and get pounded in a New Year's Six bowl game. The Big 12, let's call it what it is not a very good league. 0-3 against the Sun Belt. Oklahoma lost to one of those teams that lost to a Sun Belt team. Texas needed a miracle to beat a Texas Tech team that struggled and beat Houston Baptist by 2. Houston Baptist was picked 9th in the Southland Conference. And another thing about Houston Baptist, one half of their stadium is bleachers, the other half, a CVS. I do not make that up. You can look that up. Texas, not very good. Oklahoma, obviously not very good. I was very hard on them in my top 25 that I released this week. I have both Texas and Oklahoma barely hanging on, along with LSU, who got exposed last week against Mississippi State, yesterday rather. And I'll tell you what, for all you people that said the Mike Leach air raid offense would never work in the SEC, take that. You still think that? You like what KJ Costello did yesterday? Mississippi State's a team to keep an eye on to crash the New Year's Six. I'm not going to say that they're a playoff contender because I don't think they are. I think they're a much better team than anyone could have thought would have been the case going into the season, and I think that they could potentially crash a New Year's Six bowl game, but I think that's their ceiling because defensively they do still have issues. But my goodness, and LSU, even without Stingley, their defense just looked awful. And again, credit Mississippi State, but LSU is a far cry from the national champions of a year ago. Another team that looks a little bit, and the SEC as a whole, I mean, Georgia, figure out your quarterback situation. I mean, losing to Arkansas at halftime? Come on, man. Texas A&M beating Vanderbilt by 5? Really? Look, A&M, when you've been overrated for a long time on a yearly basis, the last thing you want to do is struggle to beat a team that got boat raced by UNLV last year and whose coach is on the hot seat. But nope, same old A&M, overrated as usual. I was probably a little generous by even keeping them in my top 25 this week, but we'll see how it goes. I don't expect them to even be competitive against Alabama next week. And certainly not if they play like that, but I just don't think they're anywhere near as good as Alabama regardless. I think they'd need an answered prayer to have a chance. Speaking of answered prayers, Florida State has not gotten their prayers answered this year. My Lord, they're terrible. Oh my goodness. I know things have happened. Mike Norvell, honestly, probably glad he wasn't there because, look, Miami is for real. They're the real deal. Rhett Lashley, their new offensive coordinator, has done a great job bringing life in that offense. And they have athletes all over the place. And De'Aaron King is very elusive. But Florida State just can't do anything right. Florida State football should not be losing games 52-10 under any circumstance, no matter how good the team they're playing is. That's just not what you think of when you think of Florida State football. They have fallen far. They are atrocious. I would put Florida State in that tier with Wake Forest, NC State, and Duke as the worst teams in the ACC. The same Florida State team that won their first 29 or so games against ACC teams when they joined the league, 30 years later, now one of the worst teams in the conference. Bravo, Florida State. You've done it. Bravo. Round of applause for the Noles, everybody. Rock bottom in Tallahassee. Alabama looked like same old Alabama, so looks like Clemson and Alabama are going to dominate as usual. Everybody else? Oh, there could be some interesting results going on with everybody else as we saw this weekend. I can't wait for next college football Saturday.